Hello, so welcome everyone to another installment of the Learning Network's regular webinar series. This is a platform where we engage in meaningful debate. We share trends and insights in the learning and development industry. Today we're going to tackle a subject that's been part of our discussion since around about 2018. That's the topic of learning culture. Though it kind of started as a buzzword, it's become a significant aspect of our work. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Helen Marshall. With a decade of experience in the L&D industry, Helen brings with her a wealth of knowledge really to the table today. She's currently serving as the Chief Learning Officer at Thrive. She is the host of the Diary of a CLO podcast and is the founder of the Women In Group. She also has a reputation for curiosity, authentic relationship building, and an unwavering commitment to learning, continuous learning in particular. Helen will help us explore what a successful, it's not a word I'm good at saying, a successful learning culture looks like, and she's going to share practical steps on how we can enhance our existing cultures. She will also touch on ways to measure the impact of these efforts, which is particularly important if we're trying to show the value of a learning culture to the C-suite. So please join me in welcoming Helen to today's webinar. I'm going to hand over to her. We will have a short Q&A at the end, and we'll kind of lead on from there. So pretty much, Helen, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and hopefully everyone can see my screens on the screen. But if not, just give me a nudge and I'll see what's happening. But yeah, as Rob said, I'm here to share about driving impact through your learning culture. Essentially, Rob just done a great job of introing me. So little did he know that I had this slide prepared. And as he said, I am Chief Learning Officer at Thrive. And all those good things he said, but also I wanted to call out that I'm actually a new member of the Learning Network, so I'm still kind of finding my feet with how it all works and joining events and sharing with the wider network as well. So I'm really happy to be here, both presenting to you all, but also joining as a member of the Learning Network too. I'm also a lover of donuts, completely irrelevant to the webinar, but just thought I'd share, and feel free to share in the chat if you also are a lover of donuts or prefer some other sweet treat. I'm going to get stuck in, and Rob kind of did just touch on this essentially a moment ago, but I wanted to start by addressing the elephant in the room, and that is, why on earth are we talking about learning culture? It's so 2018. And it was, I think, around that time, and maybe even before that, but I really remember this kind of really fervent interest in learning culture as a real buzzword within the industry around that time, and all the conferences, a bit like AI at the moment. All the conferences were talking about how you develop your learning culture. But the key thing for me here is that we're starting to see the results of that investment and interest in learning culture start to pay off, as people have been on a bit of a journey with their organizations to get their learning cultures to where they want them to be. And that's really positive, and we're definitely seeing that with our customers at Thrive. But I know within the wider industry that, you know, people have started to just invest time in looking at what a learning culture means for their particular organization. And the key thing there is that it just takes time for these things to happen. And with the buzzwords in the industry are quite guilty of making people really focus on things and expecting to see results immediately. And I know we're all aware that every organization has some sort of learning culture. It just depends on what type of learning culture it is that you're looking to achieve within your organization. So I think it's really a really exciting time to be actually taking stock and looking back at where we are, and what the outcomes of some of that investment are. And I'll certainly share a bit of a story about one of our customers at Thrive and how they've achieved business impact through their learning culture as well. Glad to see that someone's saying, does anyone not love donuts? And that's, yeah, I completely agree. I'm very, very wary of people who are not donut lovers, although they do strangely exist. So today, a few things I want to cover essentially. I'd like us all just to take a minute to reflect on what learning culture means to you all as individuals, and then take a look at what a really quick look at what the industries are currently saying. And then hopefully we can look at identifying what you can hope to achieve by creating the right culture for your organization. And I'll go through kind of 6 key steps that I think everyone should really be considering when they're thinking about how to drive impact through your learning culture as well. And actually, I'm just going to add a link to the chat. So I've got a download, a free download available for you all to have access to. There is a QR code at the end of the slides, but I'm just conscious people might not have time to stay on for the whole webinar. So if you do want to download it now, then feel free. You can go ahead and do that if you want to. Also, just to say, this webinar might not last a whole hour. I'm conscious it's Friday afternoon and people have had busy weeks and the sun is shining and people probably want to get outside for some fresh air. So we'll see what happens. You see how where the conversation takes us, essentially. I'm more than happy for you to kind of share in the chat as we go along and ask questions as we go along. And like Rob said, there will be the opportunity for more formal Q&A if that's what you prefer to do as well. So on that note, it would be really useful if you could all just take a moment to think about what does a learning culture mean to you as an individual. And like I said, just feel free to share in the chat. Have a minute to think about that and try and summarize what does learning culture mean to you. And please share that in the chat once you've had a chance to figure it out. And I'll just pause for a moment while you do that. Okay, interesting first response there from David, who's saying that it feels that something that should naturally flow through an organization. And yeah, I would agree with that. I'll just wait a second to see what others want to contribute. Ooh, Viv, I'm liking this answer. A learning culture exists where people are empowered to manage their own learning. Leaders and managers see supporting people's learning is key to their role, and there's permission to take risks and learn from mistakes without fear of negative consequences. And I'm so happy to read that because that is in line with where I'm headed with the conversation today. But that there's a real something to really focus on there is that idea of taking risks without fear of failure. And what does that mean for a business, and what can you how can that benefit a business as well? So Daniel, you shared learning is embraced and engaged with throughout the organization and aligns to the business objectives, strategy, etc. Learning is seen as necessary to enable the business to grow and achieve. And yeah, again, I agree with all of these sentiments, which is brilliant. And I'm glad to see that that's how learning culture resonates with you. All are involved, from the CEO to the employee. And again, that's a really interesting thing to call out there, that it's almost, it is everyone within the organization, but interestingly, thinking about how from CEO level down that you manage to engage people within that culture and lead by example, essentially, I think is maybe something people struggle with within some organizations. So that's really interesting that you've called that out there. I'd like you now to take a minute just to think about, well, what is learning culture currently like at your organization? So I'm not entirely sure where you're all from. I know some of you work for vendors, some of you are freelance, others I unfortunately don't recognize. So it'd be interesting to hear what you think learning culture is currently like at your own organization, if you have one. And for those who do not have an organization, maybe you have your own little learning culture. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on that as well. Yeah, that's an interesting point, Daniel, that, that there is something there, but potentially you're not quite where you want to be and you're on that journey. And I think, again, it's recognizing that it is a journey that you need to go on, not to sound too cliched. But yeah, interesting about embedding learning culture there as well. So you're working, David, with an international examination board. So you'd think a learning culture would be part and parcel of it. You would think that, and you'd hope so. But I think when you are a learning organisation, sometimes you prioritise other people's learning, ahead of your own. So, like from a vendor perspective, for example, it's easy to think about what our customers should be doing rather than what we're doing for ourselves internally. So, it's again about that journey that organisations can go on as well. And so, Pete, you've come from a tech company with a big drive and encouragement to take risks. I now work in a financial company where taking risks are big, scary things. So there's a big curve to go through. And wow, that must be a complete change of pace for you. And yeah, I mean, I'd be interested off this webinar to talk to you about that and see what kind of differences and how that shift has made you feel, because that is a really interesting shift from going from somewhere that you were able to take risks and presumably felt safe to do so, to not being able to take risks, or maybe not take risks as often as you would like. And I think that is something that a lot of organizations, and I would say particularly in the financial sector, struggle with. And that is one of the barriers to creating effective learning cultures, because you can't experiment as often as you'd like. You can't take those risks because there are so many hoops to jump through, and there's quite a lot of red tape within organizations like that. Not all of them. I don't want to generalize to all financial sectors, financial companies. But it is something we commonly see with those companies we work with that thrive, that are in the financial sector. I'm just going to pause for a second just to check whether there's anything else anyone's going to share on what learning culture is currently like at your own organisation. I can't see anything else coming through, but I'll come back to it if you do share as we move on and as we go. So I think the key thing there is that it's something that should continuously grow and be around you as an individual within an organisation, and something that you feel part of from any level within an organisation. So I think something that really stood out to me in LinkedIn Learning's workplace learning report that they released at the beginning of the year is the fact that 83% of organizations want to build a more people-centric culture. And I think that is part and parcel of organizations that have successful learning cultures really put their people first and focus on that experience. And that ultimately increases productivity, it supports innovation, it increases revenue and profit, which is something that all businesses obviously want to do, to be able to enable them to become market leaders as well. And investing in your people, therefore, seems a no-brainer, and providing the opportunity to continuously learn within organizations is really important to that element of productivity, but also that idea of profitability as well. And I think that's where we really need to empower L&D teams to really show how what they're doing feeds into those wider business strategies. So Phil, you're saying want is an interesting word here. What's the priority of it though? And that's a fair point. So they want to build a more people-centric culture, but are they actually doing it? And I think, I'm going to read between the lines of that want and suggest that those organizations are in fact therefore focusing on it because of those outcomes that they want to achieve. But yes, what is their priority? And that's a fair challenge and a fair question to those organizations. being able to therefore link learning culture to your business strategy is really important, because as this study has shown, companies that link culture to strategy and focus on people first see better financial performance. So again, tying into what I was mentioning there previously, that there's clear evidence to suggest that if you tie your learning culture and your learning strategy in that therefore creates your learning culture into your wider business goals, your wider business strategy, you're therefore going to see better financial performance. And that's where the buy-in from those senior leadership teams come from, because you're able to not only tie into those goals and those metrics that are being measured against, but you're able to show that there is real and better financial performance as a result. And David, you're saying how many of those 83% actually have a learning culture? And unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that question. But again, it's something to dig into there with the organisations that were part of the LinkedIn Learning Report to figure out. Actually, I imagine a lot of them will already have, they definitely all have a learning culture, but it's what it means to that organisation. And I think there are elements of that I'll just dig into in a moment that are part of that culture and wider employee experience that tie into what makes a good learning culture at the end of the day. So, and these are some of those things. So let's talk about some of those barriers. So a poor employee experience is often something that stands in the way of people having access to the right things at the right time. They're not really connected to people. There's no real collaboration that's going on across the organization, and things just aren't where they expect them to be at the right time. Employees are, as we know, vastly burnt out at the moment. So that stands in the way of creating a learning culture, because people genuinely don't have the time or energy to invest in themselves. And that's something that I was talking yesterday to a group of people about the idea of being productive, but associating it with activity instead of the outputs that you're creating. And people are obviously very burnt out at the moment because of that level of activity that's going on within organizations, potentially as an outcome of COVID and the way that the working world changed during the past few years. And we've not really necessarily gone back to how it was either pre-pandemic or reassessing our current working environments to think about what productivity actually means within our workplaces. And that is a barrier when you're trying to encourage people to learn, but also thinking about what actually is learning within the workplace. And it doesn't have to be something that is a formal set activity at a certain time. It's something that happens, as we mentioned earlier, continuously in the flow of learning. I think inclusive access is sometimes a barrier. So providing access to people at the right time in the places that they are, and meeting them where they are as individuals, is something that organizations struggle with, particularly when they have disparate workforces that are located in different not only different regions, but different settings as well. So without access to laptops or various equipment that office workers might generally have. And talent mobility, again, is something that organizations struggle with, but ultimately organizations that invest in learning for individuals will be able to hopefully be able to increase their rate of talent mobility within an organization. Lack of investment in upskilling is something that we hear spoken about a lot of the time, but actually what are people actually doing to try and solve the skills gaps within their organization? And it's a real challenge for people to understand what they actually need to do on a very practical level to identify skills within their business, or to therefore upskill people in the right areas, but also know where their talent can move, and therefore increasing talent mobility as well. Alignment and communication, we know, is a lot of organizations struggle with that lack of connection across multiple areas of the business, but also communicating updates and involving the right people at the right time within organizations. So all of these, I think, are potential barriers to developing a good learning culture, but also being able to kind of prove that impact on what what your focus areas are. So I'd just like to quickly bring it into a case study for a couple of minutes. I won't talk too much about this because I know it's not really about Thrive, it's about the bigger picture, but just to use some of our own experience to help frame this idea. So I'm looking at Deciem as one of our first customers that we signed, I think in the 2019, maybe the beginning of 2020. And we're really starting to see the impact. So they had immediate impact with their platform implementation, and it changed the way they did a lot of things in their business. But now, 3 years on, they're really able to kind of take stock of what they've achieved and where they've got to. So it's a really, again, looking at that idea of learning culture as a bit of a buzzword, but actually it is a thing now, and people are starting to see the results, and they're able to tie that into that wider impact that they're having. So Deciem started off, they're a beauty company, for those of you who don't know, and they started off with what was a poor employee experience. People felt very disconnected from each other, particularly in the office environments versus those that were in their labs or in their manufacturing sites. And in the distribution centres. So that idea of alignment and communication again kind of plays into that people weren't feeling part of a bigger picture. They weren't able to share their knowledge well between departments. Things were very siloed within their business. And there was also a lack of investment in upskilling for their team members as well. They didn't really have a platform or any sort of access to content to enable them to get better at their jobs, to share that knowledge, and to move around the business, and therefore impacting talent mobility within the organization. So that was that. At that point, that was when they brought Thrive in, and they said we actually need a platform that can provide these things for people or enable these things for people. And they had huge success when they first launched. That there was clearly a hunger for people to want something like this, to feel connected to the wider brand, which has really clear values and does have a real reputation now of investing in its people. They just really wanted to showcase that was a core value for them, and so they launched Thrive with a 95% engagement rate. And I know that is a vanity metric, but it's just showing how many people really wanted to log in and access whatever it was that was there. And it's a good place to start thinking about whether there's actually an appetite there within a business. So now, 3 years later, they have a really smooth employee experience. They use the platform for onboarding people really effectively. People feel very connected to each other. There's inclusive access across the organization for all different audiences and departments, and they see real success within any area of the business for content that they're creating and providing access to, no matter whether they're in a distribution center or whether they're in a head office. Everyone is engaged, which is hard to achieve particularly within a retail environment. We're seeing a lot of retail customers at the moment who are really struggling, weirdly, to engage their head office. Maybe I'm saying weirdly, but maybe that's quite obvious to you all, that the retail struggle to engage their head office when there's almost an L&D team has an expectation that because head office are at a desktop or at a desk or have access to a laptop, that they're therefore going to be more readily available and engaged in any learning solutions they provide to them. And we're seeing countless retailers come to us to tell us that's just not the case. And so we're doing a real kind of push with a variety of different retailers at the moment to think about, well, it's great that you're managing to engage your frontline workforces, those people with feet on the ground. Those people are really hungry to learn because they're not on their computers every day. They don't have their app open looking at the platform that they have on their iPad or their mobile. And so that the opportunity to do that was really something that they have felt really strongly about, and we're seeing that across different retailers, which is really interesting. But Deciem are actually doing that really well. They're actually engaging people across all departments, which is brilliant. And there's obviously lessons to be learned there for our other customers with how they do that in their own organisations as well. The key thing for Deciem is product upskilling. So Daniel, thank you for joining, and yeah, hopefully you've managed to download the PDF if nothing else. So the key thing for DECIEM is product upskilling. So they provide new product information for their employees to be able to then have the right conversations with their customers, and they can find all their product information. If they've got a new formula out for a certain type of skincare, they go on there, they can find all the information they need. So they can actually use it in the moment when they're talking to customers on the floor and potentially don't have the answer they need, but they can also do training to make them aware of what's going on that product as well. David, you said what you say emphasizes how important that whole organization is on board with the learning culture. And yeah, absolutely. I think you have to identify your key stakeholders across the organization. It's not relying on one or two people or even just the L&D team. You've got to really start building those relationships and leverage the people who understand what's going on in those locations better than anybody. And again, I'll talk to that point shortly. But yeah, so DECIEM are a great example, and I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but it's been really interesting to see that journey from those problems that they were having to how they've managed to solve that with platform and access to the right information at the right time, and just really continue that level of engagement, level of people continuously accessing content, and also really interestingly creating user-generated content, so knowledge sharing. And that is one of the key things that enables that learning culture to be embedded and to continue, is people who are willing to share their knowledge with others. And what outcomes can you expect from that? Well, DECIEM are tying this into these things, but more broadly, organizations are seeing that improved performance. They're seeing increased retention. They're able to attract more talent, because learning is seen as something that is important to individuals' roles. It's something that if people don't feel like that you're investing in their learning and development opportunities within a business, people are leaving their businesses at the same rate for lack of learning and development opportunities as they are for compensation reasons. So it tells you a lot about how important it is for individuals to to be able to have access to L&D opportunities. The other side of that, which is much harder to measure, are the things like innovation, collaboration, resilience, and psychological safety, which we've touched on earlier, in that people are not afraid to take risks because of the fear of failure. And those are hard things to measure, because it means something very different. Those words mean things that are very different to different people, to different departments, to different businesses. But there are ways to start thinking about where you are now, and how you then kind of look at making a comparison using probably qualitative data in that perspective. But they're really important outcomes for continuously fostering the learning culture you have within an organization, because those innovation, collaboration, and psychological safety in particular are really important to that continuous culture. The other side of the slide, in terms of those improved performance and the list below, are the things that senior leadership in your business are going to be really interested in tracking and having clear metrics that are associated with those. So what can you do to start leveraging your learning culture to help prove business impact? So I've summarized 6 steps that have questions attached to them that you can take. So you will have been able to download already. Sorry, I've just seen David. You said, do you have stats somewhere for what you just said about leaving compared to compensation? Yes, I do. Not to hand right now, but I do have that somewhere. I'll pull it out for you. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I can share it with you in a message, or we might be able to attach it to notes to this recording, but Rob will be able to advise on that. But yeah, really interesting stat, isn't it? That and it's I think I've actually got 2 different research papers there that back up that that move from people wanting to leave for compensation reasons as equally as learning and development opportunities or lack thereof. So first, I'm gonna whiz through these because I'm conscious we are at. Let me just check. We can add it to the resources page when the video goes up. Brilliant. That's great, Rob. I'll send those over to you, and you can access it there, David. But feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to as well, for just to make it quicker. So there are 6 steps. As I said, these are summarized in the PDF that is available to download. And I'm just going to whiz through them really quickly because there's six key things here that I think are really important. So the first one is checking data and resource availability. So this means, what data do you already have that you can start working with now? People are very scared of what data means and what does data actually look like. And it doesn't have to be something that's big and scary. It could be qualitative as well as quantitative. So, you know, think about what you have access to within your organizations. And again, building on a point I think David said earlier, is that you need to be leveraging information that's probably held by other teams as well. It's unlikely that the L&D team are going to have all of the access to everything that they need, and they're going to be having to rely on the HR teams or people teams or even IT, or they might have other data teams as well that need to, maybe that they don't know that they're holding the data that would be useful to the L&D department. So, and who's available there to support you, and who can you leverage there within those teams to help you find the data that you need. The other side of that, I think, is when you're thinking about how you're using data, but how you're maybe going to start rolling out experiments or collecting data within your organizations, don't do it at a time when people are going to be on leave. So don't roll something out in the summer when everyone's going to be on holiday, or maybe you have a large event coming up that everyone's really focused on. Don't try and get them then to share data with you, because you're either going to not get everyone involved, or you're going to miss key portions of your population there. So it sounds really silly to say it out loud. It sounds really common sense, but it's something that I know people have fallen foul of before, particularly doing things over the summer. So again, leaning on the point of leveraging the expert. So who do you need to be involved? Who could be a good advocate? So advocacy is a huge part of what we talk about at Thrive with our customers, but it's so important for making sure things are embedded correctly and that messaging is delivered consistently across an organization. Who are those key stakeholders? Do you know who they are? What's your plan for involving them? Don't just send them an email and say, I'm going to do this. You need to have a plan of action and an idea about what that looks like for them as individuals, and how will you then enable them to share that goal and the vision, and how do you buy them into your vision as a team. And I think that's where that wider business strategy piece comes in, because ultimately you're all going to be working towards the same goal. You just need to be able to communicate it differently as different teams. So again, build strong relationships. Trust takes time to develop. So yes, you may have identified those individuals that you need to bring into the conversation, but you need to nurture those relationships. You don't automatically have one with people, and I think there's often an assumption that just because you work for the same organization that you'll be on the same page, and that's not, a lot of the time that's just not true. And yes, David, advocates who are promoting the learning culture within the different aspects of the business. And I think that is really important when it comes to learning culture, that it might not necessarily be framed with the language of learning culture, but it's the idea of people having access to the things that they need to upskill or to share knowledge, or whatever that vision looks like for the business. But yes, across in different aspects of the business, so you're not just relying on an L&D team to share that vision with the rest of the business. You need to get advocates in different teams who actually this is really important for me and for my team. So if you can leverage those relationships and build trust with them and build strong relationships with them, it really does set you on course. And we've seen that consistently within clients that we work with. Utilize their time effectively. So time is the biggest challenge to everybody. You will never hear someone say, oh, I've got plenty of time to do that. You make the time for what you want, which is fine, but it's never going to go away. Work is only getting busier. People, and as teams get cut, as budgets get cut, you're going to be under more pressure to deliver the same and more, but with less resources available to you. So how do you utilize that time effectively? So you identify how much time you really need people to invest, and stick to it as well. Don't book in a half an hour meeting and be like, oh, can we just add 10 minutes on? Or think about really what it is that you're asking people to do. Likewise, don't waste people's time by creating a meeting that they just don't need to be in, that could have been an email. And everything, this is one of the most important steps, is that everything needs a measure. So whatever you're doing as an L&D team, you need to be doing it with a reason behind it. So why are you doing it? What are you trying to solve or achieve? And how are you going to measure it? You might already have an understanding of how to collect data on that and gather data now to benchmark it, which would be great. But you need to have a hypothesis for what you're trying to achieve as well if you don't have data. And I think embracing the idea of experimentation and gathering data as a result of that experiment is something that we all need to get a bit more comfortable with, that we might not be making the change that we want immediately. We need to test it, and then we need to pivot and change if it's not working or we're not getting the outcomes that we expected. And that is something L&D teams definitely do not do enough of: experimentation and changing their course of action as a result of those experiments. And if you don't know the answers to these questions, why are you doing it in the first place? You're going to waste people's time. You're not going to get their buy-in. You're not going to build relationships with them. And here is identifying what are lead or lag measurements. So lag indicators tell a story about what's already happened. Lead indicators drive future performance, and you need both of those to tell a successful story. So what's happened so far, and where are we heading in the future, and how are we going to prove it when we get there? And both are really useful to bringing people along on that journey. But don't forget the most important part, and that is your people. So again, I would say that one of the things that L&D struggle with is really putting the end user into focus in everything that they're doing. And there's not as much focus on what does this individual really need out of this. Let's go and talk to them. Let's involve them in the process. Let's ask them. Let's run these experiments. We don't need to call it a pilot. We don't need to put that label on it. We just say this is an opportunity to look at this. But whatever you're doing, involve your people in it, because you're doing it for them at the end of the day, and they're the ones that are driving your business performance in the direction you want it to go. So I've whizzed through those because I'm conscious I said I wasn't going to use the full hour, and I didn't want to waste your time, like I just said. So that's it. There's a free PDF download of those 6 steps, just as a reminder, and you feel free to scan it if you haven't already downloaded it. I'd really appreciate. I know there's been a few questions as we've gone along, but if there are any questions that people have in the Q&A, or you want to ask in the chat, then do ask. And David, you said we have no money for learning, but maybe we can have time. Andrew Jacobs, money's too tight to mention, lost and desperate. Yes, yeah. And that's it. How do you make the time within your schedules? And I think a lot, and again, this comes back to the idea of activity rather than productivity, and looking at, what are you actually doing that is producing something useful at the end of the day, or working towards a goal, and how can you look at whether there's any time within that to dedicate to learning for your people. And it comes down to something as simple as diary management, but also investing in yourself as well, which is something that I think is potentially not spoken about a lot within businesses, that idea of making time for your own personal investment development. And I would say, as L&D teams as well, as this has been quite a lot of talk recently around L&D teams not investing the time in themselves like they invest time in others. And I think that is really important to reflect on and ask, what are you learning, and when are you learning it, and are you even doing any learning? Which I hope everyone is, but I think we all need to get a bit better at asking ourselves that question. And how do you balance that learning for the organization and learning for yourself? Because they can be two different things, and that I think is something that organizations actually should be leaning into, because it might not be that there's a direct skill gap in the area that you want to learn about for yourself, but there could be transferable skills. So how do you keep track of that as well as an organization? What are our people learning for themselves, and how is that learning going to benefit the business? What do we need them to do? So yeah, really interesting point there. Thank you. And Rob, I've seen you come back on.
I have always been here. It's just when the webinar's on, I sit on my beanbag and just enjoy listening to it. Are there any questions? We've still got some time left for questions. If Helen, if you don't mind hanging on for another couple of minutes, I noticed that we've been answering questions as things go. I don't see anything in the Q&A box, although I have a couple of things coming through the webinar chat, which I'll just, if you want to keep on answering them, and then if anybody has any questions left, we've got a couple of attendees left. Please feel free to ask them just in the chat. You don't need to use the Q&A box.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Rob. And yeah, I've just seen David asked, were you at the Festival of Work yesterday? And yes, I was there. I really enjoyed myself, actually. I've not been to that event before. It was really interesting to be there and to see, it was quite HR focused, I think. But I actually joined an L&D hackathon, which was run by Niall Gavin, and it was a really interesting chat. Oh, and yeah, so you were there. Were you there, David? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Sorry, I didn't recognize your name.
So I don't see any other questions coming through. So I just think, Helen, thank you very much. I think it's quite an informative talk. I think your insights, but in particular your practical advice on learning culture were very helpful, and it certainly got me thinking about opportunities for improvement in the way that I've been doing things. I think one of the key takeaways I've kind of got here is that everybody has a learning culture. It's just, what does it look like? And it can be positive or negative, depending on how we approach it. So certainly thank you very much for your time today. So folks, looking ahead, our next webinar will be on Monday, June the 19th at 11 a.m. We're going to be hearing from Matt Ash on insight-led design, why learning is flawed and what to do about it. I'd encourage you to join us. It promises to be an insightful discussion. Just a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available in the members section of the Learning Network website within the next few days, and we're going to add all of the resources to that page as well. It's also going to join dozens of other webinar recordings that are available to all of our members. So thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope to see you next time.
And thank you, Rob. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye, folks.
Bye.